Oh, there we go. I have to click the play button. Gosh, this technology stuff, man. How's everybody doing? Oh, we got 26 people already. Is it cool if I bring the chat window into main view? What do people normally do for these things? That's probably annoying. Hey, Dougie. How's everybody doing? So I've been instructed to give it a few minutes to let all this stuff get up to Facebook and everywhere else that it's going. Hope you guys are doing well. Okay, cool. Thanks, Plans. Tama. Hello, Tama. I just heard your voice 5 minutes ago. Yeah, so I guess for everybody that is here, today, I kind of had a hard time because it's my first stream. I guess I was trying to go through best things to show. And I think just to make it easy, I'm just going to kind of free flow. And I think today I want to talk about, I'm kind of working on actually a new hard surface workflow with Nanomesh and Array Mesh, trying to infuse some of the stuff that I used during my beta artwork for R8. So using Booleans and trying to use Array Mesh and Nanomesh to repeat parts and kind of make the process easier. And, oh, sweet. Bayer and King Reborn. So you're just getting started with ZModeler. Awesome, man. Well, that's actually a lot of what I'm going to use today. And I don't know, for you and others who are just getting into it, if you haven't kind of delved into all ZModeler brush features, there's a lot of actually really awesome stuff that I think a lot of people take for granted or really just haven't made the jump. I think that's probably a lot of it is you're comfortable with other stuff. So yeah, definitely hard surface. It's not, I'm definitely at heart more of an organic sculptor kind of guy, but the last couple years I've been trying to push myself into hard surface more. And I think for this, I'm going to try and, I don't know, a lot of hard surface I think in ZBrush traditionally has been a lot of Dynamesh and polishing and, you know, techniques, that kind of stuff. But I'm kind of bringing the old school way into the new school with ZBrush, you know, poly modeling, block modeling, and with ZModeler, I'm so much faster than I ever was with using Maya and all kinds of things. So hopefully this will be a good one for all of you out there if you haven't seen any, you know, basic functionality with getting this stuff to go. So Kyle, what's the deal with everything? Is everything up? Should I get started, or let me know when? Or Kingsley? Oh, and also, can you see my lava lamp in there? Wait for it. Oh, it doesn't come in. But my Liam Neeson nonstop poster is visible, so that's great. Oh, nice. You like ZModeler and needed to change the Maya for graduation project. So I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce it. Vitjaran. Vitjaran? Is that right? Yeah, ZModeler, if for those of you just getting started in modeling and you're just learning ZModel at the beginning, you're lucky because it's definitely a much nicer workflow as far as just artistic usability and less technical stuff, a lot of buttons and menus going the old school practical approach. So, thanks to my, yeah, definitely very lucky. These guys are the best. Okay, so Kingsley, it looks like Kingsley said I can get going. Or Michael said I can get going. Okay, cool. So, you know, I started working on this sort of kind of trying to get out of workflow. I know a lot of people don't like the word workflow, but kind of trying to stick to a few sort of sequential set of events and coming up with something. So today I want to kind of focus on working on hard surface and maybe trying to get some kind of spaceship design. So usually, I guess for me, and I'm probably just going to eventually, I'm going to try and keep an eye on the chat and answer questions and stuff. So please feel free to throw them out there if you have questions or you want me to show something or just kind of bounce back and forth. I love that. I prefer that actually. So, you know, in this case, normally, obviously, everybody starts with reference. I mean, for me, for this, we have a couple hours. So I'm going to try and get through as much as I can. And I'll probably do this as a project-based thing where maybe we can go through and the next, you know, few streams, I'll be able to complete this from start to finish. Yeah, so, okay, so, you know, the beginning stages, I don't know if you guys use what do people use out there for reference? Like when you're in ZBrush, do you guys do everything a second monitor? Do you use another app that brings up windows? Like what's the general consensus on that these days? Because for me, you know, especially in this case, because I got chat window over here and it's kind of busy and distracting, I love to use Spotlight. A lot of people like to go in and use image plane, which is a really great feature we have, and we have tons of ways to, you know, bring in reference. Okay, Hazonku uses pure ref and another monitor. Okay, yeah, so second monitor. Yeah, this for me is a personal preference. I think a lot of, I think it might be distracting for some, but you know, I like to go into Spotlight, and a really cool trick, actually, I can sort of start from scratch. Normally, you know, you're going to have nothing logged or installed in here or imported. So with Spotlight, you know, you can go in, select a texture, click the Add Spotlight button, right? And that brings up the texture. And other ways, if you want to bring in multiple images, you could go into texture, import, and I think I put together a ref folder, so I got some concepts. So let's maybe grab, you know, a couple of these images. Let's say this one, right? If you grab a few, you can import, you know, a couple images into here. And then you have to go in, yeah, Spotlight with transparency in the background. Yeah, Dougie gets it. Yeah, that's right. This is the way. I'm just trying to let people know. But so this, you know, for example, you can bring in a couple images and you can select one and you can add it and continue building on top. I don't know if anybody, you know, if you guys aren't aware of this, this is a really cool way to bring in multiple images straight into Spotlight without importing them all into the texture tab. So as long as you have an image loaded onto the canvas and you have the Spotlight wheel on, so I'm pressing Z and leaving the wheel on, I can go into texture, import, and I could just go in and select pretty much everything else except for this guy, and that's going to dump all these into my Spotlight. So really easy to bring in more images, and I think I have a few more, so I'm going to leave the wheel on, go on and grab, you know, maybe these guys too. So I'm kind of just bringing in a bunch of, just a collage pretty much, just to kind of give me some things to build off of. And maybe I'll, you know, for this, for the experimentation of this workflow, I think I picked one of these images to kind of build the frame from. And I might go through and just kind of tweak stuff here and there. Images for perspective helps too. Oh, absolutely. That's for sure. I mean, especially just having something locked to a, you know, fixed to a, you know, specific angle, it definitely comes in handy. I think for that kind of stuff, I prefer, you know, using image plane and setting reference views, and that gives you more options to do transparency. But with R8, using that with live booleans, when live booleans is on, because it's technically a 2.5D feature, that functionality is not available. So that's one thing that, you know, we would try to resolve as much as possible, but that's one thing I wouldn't be able to use, especially because I want to use live booleans for this. So yeah, for me, Kingsley knows all about that. Prometheus. Yeah, this is my, this is one of my favorite ship designs recently. This thing is so cool. They did a great job with this. Regardless of whatever you think about the movie, I loved it. I don't know about you guys, but I think Prometheus was, honestly, I don't know. Those people out there that have seen Prometheus and Alien Covenant, I think Prometheus was better, but Alien Covenant had a lot more information that, you know, answered a lot of questions. But anyways, that's my take on Prometheus. But, you know, so I bring in my images, and the great thing about this is, you know, I can turn off the wheel, I can go in and I can save the Spotlight. We'll just save this as, like, we'll say temp. All right, so the position and everything comes in. So if I were to go in and load some of my other ones, say I load in maybe, I think the MISC board. Right, so this one, I started to position some of these images, right? And the positions will actually store for where you save it. So I like to sort of, you know, for me, I'm using a custom UI. This is actually a new one that I'm kind of experimenting with. But I like to position images that I'm kind of focused on at a particular time. So I could go back and load the temp one here. Right, so I have all my images, and then maybe go in and tile these small and set up just a few around the canvas. Because, you know, I don't, well, actually, I think my window's here, so I don't want to block that guy. So we can go here, maybe put these over here. And let's grab a couple more just for eye candy. Let's say, where is Prometheus? Right here. I like this one. I think this is a duplicate, so I'll just delete that. This is a real, this one's really cool. This is actually, I was considering doing a road vehicle. This is actually a, I think it's a a version they put together for an actual Mars rover, which this thing, I don't know if you guys have seen, is really amazing. I mean, this is like Interstellar, basically, but super cool design. But anyway, so getting back to kind of positioning, putting everything around, you know, I can kind of just tweak these and maybe bring all these guys down to the bottom for now, or even tuck them off to the side, right? And then once you got everything sort of laid out, turn off the wheel, I can go in texture and I can save that spotlight and let's override the old one, right? So at any time, if I go in and like change this or reorient that in any way, to get this back up and running, basically, I'll be able to save those positions and load it back in every single time, and it keeps those where they're at. So if I'm doing a likeness for a character, you know, one of my beta images, which I can show you guys, just to kind of iterate all the stuff that I want to touch on, you know, just a few pieces I made with the beta. This is sort of a mech drone using some of the new deformers, extender, you know, a lot of extender actually. And then going and using live Booleans to create a lot of this stuff. And then vehicle design, you know, doing bend curve to get shapes and Booleans to get all kinds of really clean edges. You know, majority of this, I could show you guys an image later that is all these cutouts and shapes here are Booleans. This is just basically a sphere along a curve and doing some tweaks and modifications. But what I was going to show you was this, so like Dr. Gorbart gun. If you guys haven't heard of it, it's a comic book, sort of graphic novel created by Weta, and Dr. Gorbart is sort of like this steampunk, you know, 1930s explorer adventure guy. And so I'm doing a sculpt of that, and I have reference images of, you know, certain faces like Sean Connery and, you know, likenesses that I want to match, and I keep them in places, and I just want to load those in every time. So this is kind of where Spotlight comes in really handy. So let me get that loaded back up. Yeah, the only issue with that Spotlight, just to mention, is when you're bringing in a lot of images, you notice I get a crash there. And a lot of that, if you ever get crashes if you use Spotlight, a lot of it has to do with scale of images. And we have actually made a lot of improvements to that with R8. There were more crashes, I think, with R7. But a lot of it has to do with scale of images. So a lot of times I'll go to Google and I'll search for something and I'll set it to large image. And you may end up getting extremely, you know, big images that don't appear to be that large when you're in ZBrush because you're scaling the spotlight wheel, but it can have a, you know, effect, especially when loading in multiple images. So just keep an eye out for that when you're bringing them in. You know, take a look at the images, maybe rescale them if you have one troublesome image that, you know, keeps forcing a crash with Spotlight, because it does happen to me, you know, every once in a while. So just to kind of mention that, and then I'll go through and sort of reset this up. All right, so we got, let's turn everything on. So here's kind of like a work in progress that I kind of started just to experiment with kind of what I wanted to do, just blocking out some base shapes. And I really want to go and start taking this kind of detail eventually and going further, especially using Booleans. You know, these are all just sort of like stage one, get your base shapes. Stage two, lay in some, you know, base details. And then once I got everything where I want it to scale and all of that, I can go in and start, you know, adding all those crazy minute little details that's going to make everything pop in a render. Let me check on the chat really quick. Yeah, for Lamentios, is that right? Yeah, I actually, there was a while where I was actually loading images into the background, which does get a little tricky because it's 2.5D and scaling back and forth. Eventually I want to be able to have just my own custom backgrounds with pictures, but for now, you know, it's nice to just change it up. I get a little sleepy with the default gray, you know, I don't know if you guys get the same, but I have to change it up every once in a while, which, you know, you can always cycle through the default scripts at the top, which are nice. But customizing, I think, I mentioned it in our podcast. I don't know if you guys listen to the ZBrush podcast, but I think I've dropped it a couple times. Like if a movie comes out that I love, I'll pick colors out of the color palette and make a UI for that and use that for like a week or two. But it's always fun. Okay, so, you know, I'm going to go ahead and start from scratch, and then maybe I'll come back and really what I want to focus on is Array Mesh and Nanomesh. Those are features that I don't know how much you all use Array Mesh and Nanomesh and how you use it. From my perspective, I see a lot of people seeing it working for some things, but not working, you know, as a creative tool to go through and propagate details and things, which is something that I'm working out in this workflow as a way to take a bunch of base parts and start sort of blocking things out, and then using it to apply with Nanomesh and Remesh. And the great thing with live Booleans is now we can use that to repeat parts and then create Booleans from those pieces and create instances, basically. So it's with a spaceship, especially when you have a lot of crazy details that going in with ZModeler on one unified mesh that has topology in your block modeling, that that's going to become a nightmare. So this is definitely one of the benefits of being in ZBrush, is that we can use all these features. So I'm going to kind of go in and start from scratch. In this case, normally what I do, and I'm actually going to scale these down just a little bit more. And I always set them to, eventually I'm going to go full screen and I'm going to drop the menus. Hopefully it's okay for you guys if I am using a custom menu for a lot of this stuff. So the way that I'm doing is I have a lot of hotkeys assigned to certain functions that I use all the time. And then anything else that goes into menus, so instead of going to the tab, going through the tool menu, especially when I'm trying to design and not get stuck going into menus, this is the custom UI that I made. So I've assigned a custom palette that I've made with custom subpalettes in here. And I've turned off, I have one open subpalette on, so it only opens one at a time. And then I assign this to the 2 key, and then wherever my cursor is, I can go through and just quickly access some of these things. So if anybody has questions or whatever, what things I'm using for this, throw it out there and I'll try and keep an eye on the chat. But it helps me a ton. It helps me just keep focus and use my full screen to model and create. So I'm going to save this spotlight one more time. Let's hope everything's in order. There we go. Okay. And when I start with these kinds of projects, especially in this sense using Nanomesh and Remesh, the best way really is going in and just kind of free-flowing and modeling out just basic parts and pieces. So with the idea in mind that you're going to use them to either create an insert mesh or insert multi-mesh, or use it to just append and position, and keep things separate, especially at the base design, part of your design. When you just get started, you kind of you need something to work with. And oftentimes if I'm working on one piece, you have less flexibility, really. So starting with multiple, and then I'll go through and sort of unify everything together towards the end. So, this is, if I just cycle through, I just got some basic stuff like, piece for a cockpit, just basic details that I might want to add. And most of this stuff is just going through, like even just a simple, cube that I turn into something, right? And turn on dynamic, right? You're just getting some base details that I can use to work with. So I could take these things later and turn them into something else. Some panel parts for the outside, some tileable pieces that I might be able to use, some cross hatches. There's like some, oh geez, what's the term for this? This would be like a, like scaffolding, or like, like a frame that I could use to apply. So I'm looking at maybe this guy as a design piece that I might start with. So, at the very beginning, I think what I did first is I went in and I created bevel start cubes. So these are just, basic cubes that I went in. If you take a simple one here, let's go in and bring in a polycube. All right, so especially with hard surface, you can go in. A lot of what I do is I assign creases and dynamic subdivisions. I don't ever go in and do subdivisions or anything, especially at this stage with hard surfaces. It's going to get really dense, especially if I'm going to use multiple pieces. So I always use dynamic subdivisions to kind of control the look of these things. So, turning on dynamic, normally by default you would just have cube grid off and you could just do a smooth, right? And you get a smooth cube. Something that I do is, I assign the polygroups, the auto groups features grouped by normals to hotkeys. So for me, I have Control-Shift-L that'll group by normals, and then Control-Shift-C is crease by polygroups. So crease by polygroups. And what this does is I can press D and I can smooth it out. At level 15, it's very crisp and clean. So, check my level. I'm at smooth subdiv level 5. So I could go into crease and set this maybe to, 3. And then Shift D and D again, and I get a little bit more of a fine-tuned edge. So I like to just pick a setting that I like to get the edges and the details. Another one that I like, if you don't, this is sort of later in the stage, I like to do this also at the beginning, is do no smooth subdivision modifiers, go into Cube Grid, set this maybe to 1, and then I can go in here and play with the coverage. So this is what you'll see a lot of these cubes when I start going through, is I just went through and I changed at different levels. So you might see I think I have them, you know, labeled 1 through whatever. So I apply it, and then I can use this as a starting point with some little edges just for a better look, because when it's perfectly crisp edges, it's just, I think it's kind of boring, and it doesn't feel real. So you can go through and easily apply this without slowing down ZBrush or your computer. All right, so, you know, starting with some of these cubes here, I think the base goal is, let's start blocking out the basic frame. So I'm going to use this guy maybe as a ref, and then we'll work from there. So I'm going to keep everything on the left. And actually, to start from scratch, we'll clone this, reset, and start here. All right, let me check to make sure. Oh yeah, I am using a mouse for this. For hard surface, I don't know, especially because I'm using Gizmo and I'm using a lot of on-screen controls, a lot of going in and scaling. Oftentimes, especially with deformers, when you have your pen and you're trying to grab things, I find it visually kind of distorting to have my hand in front of it. You know, in that case, when I'm sculpting, it's perfect. But for this kind of stuff, especially block modeling, I don't know. I think it might just be a default thing in my brain that I'm accustomed to. Hard surface modeling is mouse, because that's what it was for me, you know, 8 years ago or 10 years ago. But I think I need to get over that, or just get a longer pen. You know, if I could figure out how to do it like this, I think I'd be okay. But yeah, I'm going to use a mouse for this, but hopefully that's okay. But yeah, for in core for tablet, I'm actually on a Cintiq 22-inch HD. That's what I'm using in the office, and we have, you know, I think I have an Intuos 5 laying around here, but I've been on this Cintiq for about 1.5 years now, which is, it's nice. I've tried the Cintiq, the Pro, which the one that Paul has, I don't know, I want to say the thing is like 30 plus inches, and it's amazing. But also, I think I don't know, for those of you that have been using Wacom tablets, for example, you get used to the, you know, hand to screen orientation. If you did that long enough, it's kind of hard to use a Cintiq, which even some of the best sculptors, I think Dominic Quick is one of those people who, you know, he can't use the Cintiq because he's been trained to use this thing. So I don't do well with the big screen either, because it's just long, broad strokes that I'm just not, the muscle memory is different, I think. So I guess that's how I reason it in my head. All right, so let's get started. And please throw out any questions while we go. I'm going to close my tray. And if you guys want, you know, I can give you the custom UI menu or the hotkeys if that helps, which I should have grabbed a on-screen playback to show you guys my hotkeys, but say let me. All right, so I'm going to go in, and, you know, for this stuff, you could do one of two things. I always like to start from scratch. No edge loops. Too much distraction for me. I just like to go in and kind of just grab ZModeler, and let's go in and start adding some edge loops. For now, you know, I always like to drop one in the middle, maybe, and we can go in and start scaling this. So I really like this design. This kind of, I don't know, it's got sort of like a, what would be it's like, sort of like, not Star Wars, but it's kind of an infusion of all kinds of things. It looks more like Prometheus, all the kinds of details and coloring. I like that, which I think is why I started with this guy. So I'm just going to kind of go in and bring all this stuff in. And I like to, you know, I keep my symmetry controls visible. Like I said, I don't like to open up too many menus, especially in this. It just gets a little taxing after a while. So I could put the primary stuff that you know, there's only so many hotkeys you can assign. So I use those for very essential things. And then this kind of stuff, lazy mouse, symmetry, I can kind of easily access. All right, so I got some basic pieces here. Right, and then one thing to note too is that, you know, if you're using that, I kind of want to get that nice beveled edge there just to kind of get a look going, so it's not a clean edge, but it changes based on scale. So if you have it set to a certain value, you know, at the base cube level, when it's a unified mesh, it's going to change a little bit. So once I get this going, I can maybe go and crank that up. And then let's go in here, and I'm just going to break off one of these guys. So with key mesh, just grabbing a point, hitting control, I can break off these parts and pieces. So I'm keeping these separated, but all in the same tool because it's easier to work with that way. But eventually, the one thing I like about this is when, say you want to go and you want to level edges out, in the sort of old school Maya way, you could go Gizmo, alt-click, align it to the masked area, and then you could go in, turn on your local, and you'd scale these guys like so. But I always sort of default to Control-Shift as the clip curve, right? Because this is really nice to just kind of go in and easily like flatten these guys out to the same, level, which is really nice. So maybe I'll go in and just move these around. And then let's move these guys up. So I'm looking at some of these frame pieces here. And then also another thing that I use, mirror and weld a ton. I use mirror and weld, and I have turn on my floor grid. I usually use a default floor. I don't like to work with floor grid. I don't know about you guys, but it gets very distracting, right? So the best thing that I can do, you need the floor grid to, especially for mirror and welding, to show you what axis, the positive axis. If you've ever run into, you got the good stuff on one side, but you want to mirror the other side over. Yeah, I got a mirror, weld. So I like to keep tabs on that and keep the floor grid there to show me the X, Y, and Z axis. So I kind of went in and customized my own. So I'll just open up I have a customization folder with these kinds of things. Right, so this just has the floor grid moved way down. I think I changed the color of it. So I went into modifiers, changed the color to, we can color pick to this. I think I changed it based on the background. So it kind of blends in with the background a little bit more. So you see how it kind of just went from, purple to blue. So you almost don't see it. And then I scaled up the axis is all the way up to 9. So it gives you a large axis. So when I'm close up on the mesh, you don't see the floor, but you do see your X, Y, and Z axis. So little workaround to kind of give you a visual aid without having to turn on Gizmo or turn the floor grid on by default. So then, in these cases, I click 2, and I have my mirror in Topo Essentials. So I could turn on mirror and weld in Y. Click yes. Oh, make sure I have local symmetry off. Right, so I can kind of match that piece like so. Alright, so let's go in here. So if I'm looking at this guy, there's sort of like a front piece. This is a separate piece. There's 2 sections here, so I'm going to try and take this. Alright, so let's grab these guys. Alright, so now this is where the key mesh stuff comes in really handy, because I could just go in. This is where I start kind of just manually going single edge loop, maybe add an edge here, and now I want to go and just key mesh these guys, close that out. So I'm sort of getting this sort of stair stepping effect, which, I could go in now and cut this off, and key mesh this with stepping here. Bring those guys in. And then, it depends on what your obsession is. If you hate tries, or you hate, getting triangles, it's something that I kind of have a hard time letting go of. But, with QMesh, you can go and you can enable triangle step. So I could step this straight up, and if I go back to this example, like here, for example, I can go actually merge those verts. I like to keep the disabled tri-step so I get that extra little edge, because sometimes, honestly, with hard surface, the more edges you can get, if you think about it in a render sense, you're getting more edges to bounce off of, and it's not just a perfect 90-degree angle. It always looks better. So in this case, I don't mind it at all. I kind of just go in and get a little stepping. And then we can maybe go in here, bring these guys up. All right, and let's see, I'm gonna grab. So I like to, I don't know how you guys feel. ZModeler has pretty much everything you could ever need. You can mask and do all these things to align stuff, but I always focus on a few specific ZModeler features. I do a lot of insert edging, I do a lot of Q-mesh, I do a lot of bridging. You know, those things are specific, and you know, when you go to each thing for points, I do a lot of sliding, so just sliding individual points. So I kind of stick to those, and when I need to scale things or move things, that's where Gizmo is so awesome now, is I can just mask off areas pretty easily, and then just go in, lock these guys in, and just maybe scale this out like so. And then sometimes I'll go into the edge and I can slide this, you know, maybe bring that out. And then let's scale that a little bit further. And then handy dandy clip curve, as Paul loves to say. I don't know where the Blue's Clues references started coming up in our streams. Does anybody else notice that? Do you guys watch, does anybody watch our ZBrush, our 4.8 release stream? I feel like the Blue's Clues references were heavy in that one. All right, let's go mirrored weld. There we go, so I got that working. And then, you know, it's something that comes in handy if you kind of want to check. Like, you can smooth everything out, and this is a great thing with the Q grid, because the Q grid, you don't have to deal with smooth modifiers. If I were to turn this off, you know, if I smooth everything, I have to go in and assign polygroups or do creases manually to make this process easier. That's why I assign polygroup by normal, which, you know, you can go into polygroup by normal here, and you have a max angle. So group by normal will give you a polygroup depending on each different normal axis. So it'll try to assign it in most places, but you know, you'll see in some of these cases it doesn't. These ones technically should not be blue or should be a different color. So you can always change that. You can set this thing a lot lower, and it's going to give you a wider range of groupings. For the most part, I keep it at default until I need to. But in this case, it looks like that actually worked pretty well. And then, so for me, if I group those together, Control-Shift-L is polygroup by normal, and then Control-Shift-C, crease polygroups, and then I get majority of that stuff. So I can kind of limit the amount of work that I have to do. You'll see that like these ones didn't crease, but you know, could be a happy accident, or I could just quickly go in, you know, crease edge loop really quick. Just to kind of see, you know, I like to see the look when it's sort of polished and clean every once in a while, you know, every 20, 30 minutes. So I kind of bounce back and forth with these. But that's kind of where Q-Grid is great, because you don't have to do all of that. So I could turn dynamic on, go smooth off, leave this at 1, and it's giving me a little edge, and I can just change the coverage as I keep scaling the mesh. So which I like that. I like that at this stage, and then eventually maybe I'll turn it off and, you know, go back to the standard sort of, you know, creasing and edge loops, or if you like doing insert edge loops to hold your edges, that's a good way too. I mean, luckily it's ZBrush, and you can go up into millions of polys and it's fine. You know, in that case, so you don't have to struggle too much with that. But so let's see, let's take a look at this guy. And then also another one I like to do to make it easy before I even get it. Once I have creases applied, so if I need them, I can auto group these though. And then now I can go in, let's insert an edge loop. This is sort of I think a neurotic habit I have, but I like to put edge loops just one across everything. Part of the reason is a lot of times I use the Control Shift using the lasso. So going to the lasso, if you guys are aware of this, when you hover between an edge loop, so you have an edge flow going this way, hover between this point and this point, clicking between the middle, close to the middle, you can isolate an actual edge loop around. So when you're selecting things, and if you have the lasso, a lot of times if you don't have a point that sort of intersects, that comes across perpendicular, it's hard to discern the difference between selecting the group itself. So if I were to Control-Shift-L, like grabbing this is easy. I can grab this chunk because there's a point. But if I go in and say delete that edge loop, now with the selection lasso, I usually have this on by default. Now I could go in and I might accidentally do this, right, where I'm just selecting that clean edge loop. So it kind of removes the back and forth of that and just makes it easier, especially when you're selecting polygroups in that way. So just a little tip if you guys do run into that yourselves. I mean, The lasso is the only one that has this functionality. So being able to hide edge loops like so. So that's just hiding visibility, and I can inverse. So if you're selecting groups, like in this way, I want to go in and just select it, mask it, inverse, and then use gizmo. Using the selection rectangle, you won't have that issue. So let's see, I'm going to bring this to the center, and let's make sure that's right. All right, so this is pretty much the process. Let me just block out some of these shapes, and then I'll move on to the more interesting stuff, the Nanomesh stuff. But let me make sure you guys don't have any questions. Okay, we're good. All right, so let's take this guy. So I'm just holding Control with a masked off part, and I can duplicate that. So I'm kind of trying to hit the wing now. So let's make this one really long. Make sure I have my symmetry on. Yeah, like for this one, you know, it's tough if you look at an image with perspective. I'm trying to make sure I get everything matched as well as I can, but kind of just eyeballing. I think that's part of the fun part of, especially designing. If you're just trying to come up with your own kind of thing, it's almost better to just not have anything to restrict you or force you into one direction. Okay, so I'm going to turn on symmetry Y so we can tackle this right away. Another great thing about clip curves, I can do that without doing the mirror and welding. And then let's say, let's grab this guy. So if I want to scale something, I usually just alt-click on a point. So I'm using that as my pivot point and then resetting. And I can just go in and stretch this out a little bit. Maybe make these wings really wide. Okay, I think that's probably a little too long. All right, there we go. All right, so there's a little stepping here, so I might go in and do, we could do one of two things, you know, if you guys are, we could go in and say, like, for example, you could do single edge loop, I can maybe add one here, right? So this sort of step up, plateau, step down. So I could maybe do something like this, grab these faces, use the move, or you could polygroup these first, right? But I want to lock in this edge, so I can maybe go in and just scale that like so, right? Or another option would be to say, for example, we delete these edge loops, right? And we could do insert, we could do multiple and set this to say 2, and then we could do specific elevation, maybe, see if we can get that way too much. So let's set this to say maybe 1, give that a shot. All right, so you could do something like that to scale it, or we could do interactive, which is actually probably the best case scenario because it gives you a little bit more visibility as it's happening. So kind of dragging to the right, and I can scale. The only issue with this is that you're getting that inflate, right? So I want to keep this stuff unified. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You can use this in a way, you know, if you want to go in with X, Y, and Z, for example, on local, we could grab this and maybe just use clip curve to tidy that up. You know, that's one way. And let's just do Z. Right? So I think the first route was a little better. There we go. All right, so let's say we got that stuff lined up, and I'll worry about that top piece later. All right, so then now for this, I'm going to start just kind of spacing things out a little bit better. We scale this guy. All right, so the good news with this guy, I think, is there's a few repeat parts back there, some little covers and space between, so we can maybe do some arrays or duplicate the same part. We can kind of play it by ear. So first I'm gonna maybe go in, control drag to get this in place. And that one's looking pretty much smaller. I can't tell with the perspective, but let's see. All right, so really quick, I could go in and just do a quick mirror and weld. X. All right, in this case, I don't know how you guys deal with, especially with hard surface. There's a lot of benefits to, depending on when you're doing mirror and weld and location. I always try and keep things as, center oriented as possible. So in the unified space, so the unified space is, essentially just going to deformation. We can always unify, which is sort of the ZBrush, default scale, which, if you ever run into issues when you scale meshes really big and certain things change, or brushes are reacting in different ways, or certain features, a lot of it sometimes has to do with scale. So scale is important. Kind of keeping tabs on that stuff just helps you keep things cleaner and less issues. You'll run into less confusion and have less questions as far as like, why can't I get this to work now? That's one thing that I do often. Every 20-30 minutes, if necessary, or if I can, unify when possible. All right, so moving on. Let's see what we got back here. Scale this. All right, now at this point, I think what I want to do is, there's a couple of those repeat parts back there. I really want to make sure that I can tackle getting some arrays going. So this is where the power of array mesh I think is really awesome, is now I'm going to go in and just polygroup and auto group everything. And then let's do, oh, what happened there? 1 second. That's why I had something messed up. All right, so let's do that now. So just going in, polygroup, auto group, and then I'm going to split these parts off. So do a group split. And now, I always like to go through and keep everything organized. So we'll just do bridge front 1. And say I always label them with a number just in case, if I'm going to take this part and turn it into something else, I can kind of keep them oriented, organized. By giving it a value, I can duplicate it, it's going to take the next value too. So it makes it easier to kind of just keep them same name convention, numerical order. And then this one, so I'm going to move this down the chain. So we want this to be number 3. Or say ship. All right, there we go. All right, so now I can go ahead and start working on these guys individually. And I'll close the tray. All right, so this piece, there's those repeat parts back there, and I can take those now, and I can go in. So let's just start doing some arrays, start speeding this up. So I'll go array mesh. I can turn this on. I don't know, by, oh, you guys referencing the ship for Battlestar Galactica, or just talking about Battlestar Galactica? I was just talking to Michael here at Pixologic about this the other day. I got obsessed with Star Trek in the last maybe 5 years, which Kyle has gifted me with one of the best gifts ever, Geordi LaForge action figure, which is amazing. But I've never seen Battlestar Galactica. I wonder if it's time to actually make the jump. All right, so I'm turning on array, locking position and size. So I don't know if you guys how many of you guys use ArrayMesh and Nanomesh? Like, anybody out there familiar with it? Because there's a lot of ways you can do it. We can offset values using sliders. We can use Gizmo. I like to use the transpose method because it gives me a sort of tactile approach where I can scale it, myself. So locking position and size keeps everything where it's at, and I can just go in and turn on transpose and then disable Gizmo, and I can go in and start pulling these pieces out. So the great thing about this is, right, so I've got these pieces going, and there's a lot of options I have. Number one being I can take this and, these pieces are fairly far back in that region there, but I can go in here, and if you've used it, I can go in within preview. I'll make sure my symmetry is on in X, go back to Gizmo. I can start making modifications to it. Let's turn that off. All right, and see those updates in real time. So as a design tool, especially in this case, because I'm not quite sure how everything's going to look, why would I want to go in and make 3 parts and do all these details and then go, oh crap, I don't like it. I want to go back and make another one. I can take this and I can sort of modify on the fly and repeat or add more, which may end up giving me more options, right? So let me just reset this. Specific, and we'll do interactive. So get back to QMesh. So this might be where I switch back to single. All right, so we got these guys. Smooth that stuff out. So this is where that dynamic needs to go down just a little bit. Okay, or for this piece, it's giving me some nice bevel edges, but it's not perfect. So this one I might turn off. This one's where I might start setting my polygroups and getting my creases lined up for these guys, because this is where it kind of helps with very specific edges like these here when they're really close together. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, sort of walkthrough I went through, but let's say I'm going to group by normals, and I actually want to go through and just do some manual groups. So I'm just polygrouping these guys, cycle through, and solo. So I have solo, Control Shift S, so I'm kind of just making it easy so I don't have to go all the way down or move that somewhere. All right, so I'm just making sure I got a polygroup for everything, and then we could go in. I think in my edge loop I have crease settings too, so I can uncrease all crease polygroups. All right, so that's creasing at level 15. So I'm going to bring this down. It depends on what kind of thing I'm working on. I like to have a little bit of a smooth edge. So starting with 3, going up to 6. So at level 3, it's not going to smooth. So dynamics on, it's going to hold up until 3. So basically this is saying once you get to 3, that's where you're going to start smoothing after that value. So leaving this at 3, I can go to dynamic, and now once I hit 4, you're going to get a little smooth, and then all the way up to 6. So it's sort of like a multiplier. So take the crease start value, multiply 3 by 2. So you get 6. That gives you a pretty good smooth. If you want to change that even more, you can crank this up to say 4, and then we can go dynamic again, and that looks really good. So as you increase that crease stepping, it helps a ton. And then it looks like maybe let's see, where is there let's go crease edge loop. All right, so for this stuff, and also with this too, if you really want to get in there, you can apply creases and then maybe just tighten up one edge with an insert. Give you that, and maybe this guy. Keep it minimal, not too much. Yeah, there we go. All right, so if I want to mirror that really quick, I don't know if you guys are aware, but having a ArrayMesh preview on, we can't mirror and weld. It's going to break this, so you got to turn off your preview. I can go in and turn on my local mirror and weld in Z. There we go. So I think it's my obsession is trying to keep things symmetrical all the time, which is not really that necessary, but especially in this case, it's not that necessary. But now, if I wanted to, I can go in and maybe change this to say 4, right? And then go back to Gizmo, turn on transpose, bring these guys out. Right, so I got 4 pieces in here. And this one, I actually want to go in, I'm going to make these smaller. So I'm going to go to Gizmo. I'm just going to scale the first mesh. And then let's take this all the way up to say 6. Right, so I'm just scaling the mesh down, giving more space, and then adding more to the repeat. And then now I could go in and maybe just start to play around with this. All right, and then the next thing I want to do is maybe add on top. So they sort of look like they're extensions or sort of like panels basically sitting on top of something. So I could go in and let's duplicate this. So this is array body 1. Let's go array body 2. Solo this guy out. So this is going to keep those settings, which is great. So I can keep everything in there. Maybe for this one, I'm going to bring this back down to say 3. And then I want to scale this and make it wider again. So I can turn on transparency, make this wider. So I kind of want to cover this outer layer up. And then let's go in and let's make a little extrusion here. Solve these guys out. All right, now for this piece, I want to go in and I want to do just the outer layer and bring this out. So I want to create a separation, sort of. So what I can do is let's group this together. Let's assign a group for those guys. Let's just delete this and then turn on display properties. And we could do that. Group by normals, get rid of this guy. I should have done that first. All right, so now we got this. And I could go in, you know, especially when you're doing something like this that has a lot of edge loops, I could go in, QMesh, all polygons. I could bring these guys up, but you'll see that in this case, because I have that stepping there, there's an overlap, you know, where you're getting intersecting extrusions. So for a piece like this, I might clean it up a little bit, get rid of that, and then let's maybe stitch these guys down. Cool. All right, now I can go in and let me just, I'm going to do no creases for now. So kind of start from scratch. Where did that one come from? I didn't see that. Okay. There we go. So check really quick. Let's do mirror and weld. Oops, turn on my array mesh, turn it off. There we go. Okay. All right, so then now I can go in and do this. There we go. All right, so solo. So now I'm kind of creating this sort of bridging here, and I could maybe go in and just play around with the scale. Bring this up. Just trying to match that angle a little bit. And I can mirror weld in X and Y. There we go. All right, so I got something working there. So now I just want to play around with the alignment. We go to Gizmo. So each one's covering up 2 pieces there just to give me some details. All right, so this is the overall process I kind of went through to get the block out of this thing. So what I really want to do is start going into the detailing process with these sort of base blockouts. So if it's all right with you guys, I can skip ahead to getting into the Nanomesh stuff unless anybody is, you know, really dying to see me block out this base low poly spaceship. I'll move on unless anybody screams at me otherwise. All right, so let me load the, let's start with just the bridge. So I'm going to break this stuff off into a new tool so we can start from scratch. Right. So I'm just inserting the pieces from this tool. Or what I could do, actually wouldn't be so bad. Let's do a little fancy trick. So let's go in and this is the bridge start. I don't know if you guys have been using Booleans, the chain works really well. I like to go through and organize subtools like per group. So if I'm working on one front part and this has a bunch of pieces in there, I set that one to top and I can shift click, turn everything off, and this will just turn on the bridge stuff that I was working on. So now I can go in and maybe just disable the stuff I don't want. Just clicking on the dark gray bar below. Okay, delete that. Okay, I want this guy on in the bridge. In the frames. Engine base. Don't want this. Okay, cool. So this is just the base version of everything that I have without any details, just doing all the same stuff. So hopefully that's cool with you guys. I think it should be pretty self-explanatory. Just using those same stuff, Gizmo, ZModeler, to kind of block out these pieces. So for this, I just want to break these off and get rid of everything else. So I'm going to merge visible, which is going to break this into a tool. And then, I don't know about you, but I get lost when my toolbox starts filling up. So I select the thing I'm working on, click restore, which will keep everything in here, but I'm just not deleting anything. I'm just cleaning out my toolbox to make it simpler. So now I'm going to go and it's all merged, so I can just do my auto group everything together. Let's quick save. And let's do a split, group split. There we go. All right, so this guy, I believe, had some remesh, but let's set this up again. Or actually, I can also go back to the old tool and just copy these. Okay, so let's go delete the practice. So I can go to these remesh settings, copy them, paste these here. All right, so the scales changed just a little bit, so I can just go in, turn on Gizmo. Let's go lock position size. Repeat 9. Let's just do that. Okay, sweet. I think that just about covers it. So then now I can reset this. I want to bring up my middle panels. Okay, so we've got, basically I've just got all the stuff blocked out. Same process, sort of going in and applying some base details to the back engine, and I might need to just go in here and complete out the shell. So let's do a few more touch-ups. Kind of just want to bridge this gap. Set this to single. Alright, so I'm just trying to cut away at any of the similar, trying to get rid of all these perfectly clean edges. Doing just a little bit of Q-mesh along the borders to make it a little bit more interesting. Crease those guys. Maybe go in and do some manual creasing real quick. There we go. Almost got it. Okay, cool. All right, so now we get to the more fun and interesting stuff. So we got a lot of these base pieces, and I'm probably going to start with, I started with the engine because that had a lot of really interesting shapes. I've got some little close-ups cut out just of that piece back there. And when I started with this, I went in, like I showed you guys at the beginning if you were tuned in, I had I spent some time just block modeling some base things that I knew I would want to use. So any scaffolding I could use to play around with, maybe mirroring, welding this to the other side, or using this as a base to start. And these are actually, if I auto group these, they're 3 separate pieces, so they're not welded together. So this is its own piece, right? And these are their own pieces as well. So if I need to, I could break those off later. So then, I kind of went down the list and started just making stuff, looking at images that, looking at parts of my reference and kind of just making some base stuff. Like this piece right here, I'm not even sure where it's going to work, but I'll find something for it. And then kind of just cycling through. So what I like to do now is, in this case, it comes down to, for some of these pieces in here, I mean, I don't know if you guys see that, but the benefit here is that I got all this stuff here, and now I can go in and just on the fly start making modifications to all these things, across all of these array mesh pieces. And then even if I wanted to, the great thing about this is I could go in, if I solo this, with array mesh while it's in preview, you can go through and model, but then also at the final stage you have this extrude option. So I could go in and maybe assign polygroups to areas that I want to extrude. So let's go polygroup for that guy, and then I will mirror and weld this along the X. Right, and when I make the mesh, eventually I can go in, and if I need to, I can do that extrude option. Right, so what I would need to do, if I go back to preview, is let's bring this, I need to assign that polygroup on both sides. So it's going to connect to each polygroup. So I could easily I did it on one side, I could just local symmetry, mirror and weld, I believe, in Z. Oh, I always forget that. There we go. Okay, array mesh on, extrude, right, and you can bridge those gaps. Right, so that's another really cool feature, is that if I don't want these to be spaced, or I want some of these to be connected, and I could go in and assign a polygroup to this area and then maybe this area. So now we can mirror weld in X and Z. Right, and bridge all those gaps. So that's one of the benefits with the ring mesh, especially in this case. But what I want to go in is actually use Nanomesh, because a lot of these pieces I want to go through and take some similar parts and put on another side and mirror and play around with the tiling and all of that. So that deals more with assigning to the geometry itself. Where a ray mesh, we can kind of work within the entire space and just repeat parts along an axis. But in this case, I actually want to go in and make some of these parts into Nanomesh brushes. So, you can always go in, you can create a multi-mesh brush if you want to. I can go ahead and, use these to select from or insert on top. But for me, because we're going to be going in and doing create insert mesh and then create Nanomesh brush, the sequence of events is create the insert mesh and then create the Nanomesh. So I like to just be able to view my parts and pieces and pick them out and make them Nanomesh brushes as I go. That's just the way where my mind goes, especially in a creative space, I guess. So one thing that helps me is I keep everything, I take the first piece, go into deformation, unify this, and then repeat to others. So that keeps everything in that perfectly, sort of square unified space. So it's all here, and then I can go in now and use my expose option. So I can expose all this. And I think in this one I have just X and Y turned on, so there's no Z exposed, so it kind of lays everything out. But what's really cool is, the insert mesh can be created anywhere. So I can go through and just kind of cherry pick parts. So I can maybe grab, I believe the one I want to start with here is, say, this one. So I'm just alt clicking on that mesh. And I don't have to do anything. I can leave the expose on in this view, go into brush, can make an insert mesh, do new, and then now I can go insert or create Nanomesh brush from that. So now it's assigned it in ZModeler. So I go ZModeler brush, hover over poly, and we have insert Nanomesh. So let's go back here, and I'm just going to start working on this piece. Now, in this case, we're dealing with symmetry, and the rotational values with Nanomesh may not perfectly align to the other side. But, I like to work on the left side in this case, where I keep Z facing me, so left is always positive. So I'm always going to mirror and weld at the end. So I kind of just go in and let's just focus on an area to kind of work on. So first and foremost, we can kind of go in and assign polygroups to everything, or assign a single polygroup to everything, and then maybe I want to go in and just start picking out areas where I'm going to assign these nanomeshes. So I want to maybe do corners here. All right, and I can maybe do top and bottom is going to be a little different, so I'll keep those guys like different groups. And then now we can go into our Nanomesh, and I can do polygroup all. So I can go in and I can just drag these out. Oh, looks like I lost my brush. Let's go. There we go. All right, so holding shift. All right, so I'm assigning it to that polygroup. So now I'm going to go into Nanomesh, and right now I've got a rotational value when I inserted. So this is where I go in, and you've got to start to play around with the alignment of getting these things. So I'm kind of trying to get these sort of cube-like pieces wrapping around, getting some details going. So I'll start with Z rotation at 0. First thing I like to do is just set my alignment to normal until otherwise. So I could go in here and let's say we play around with the rotation. So I want to rotate this maybe 90 degrees. And you can play around with different alignments too. So you can get interesting effects for everything. You could maybe get a randomized effect, or you want these to be in different areas, like so. Right? Or I could easily go in, because we can build on nanos as well. So I could maybe even start from, just do one at a time. So I'll assign a different polygroup to each corner. And I can always just copy and paste after. Let's go back to the nano. Set that thing to 0. And we'll do normal. All right, there we go. All right, so now we can play around with the offset X, Y, and Z. In this case, it's going to be a little different because it's oriented to the mesh, so you figure out which one works for what you're trying to do. So I kind of want to bring this outwards just a little bit, or inwards. So So negative 0.5, and then y. Negative 0.05. How about that? There we go. Okay, cool. All right, so I got this aligned, I got this thing facing, and now I want to kind of go through and mirror some of these things. But you know, we can play around with flipping horizontally, flipping vertically. If that doesn't work for you, right, I could easily go in and just rotate this 180. Right, if I want to align this sort of detail here, in this case I'll leave it like so. So now I can go in, I can copy this, right, and I can go back to my Nanomesh, insert a new one. So you see we're going to start adding to the index. And now I can go in and paste, right? And then in this case, this is where I want to play around with my rotation to match this. So I could flip. If that doesn't work, I could easily go in and just do 180. Right? So I'm kind of getting these details from that cube on the inside. And then I could go in and just continue to play around with the copy and paste. So I can copy this one, and we can go down, add a new. So that's matched up, and I can cycle through the indexes. So I can go all the way back to the first one, copy that one, and we can go in here, just clicking and dragging, add a new, and paste. So I can start matching that. All right, and then same thing for the other side. So I'm just adding multiple indexes here, and I think for these two, I want these guys to maybe come out a little bit further. Oops, offset. Here we go. All right, so let's copy that one. Paste it up top. Cool. All right, so I copied that. I'm going to go to the last index, and then I could just go in and do the same thing for each one of these. Go back to the first one, I believe. Cool. All right, so I got some stuff working here, and what's really cool is, you know, we can now go in and play around with, you know, the tiling of certain things. So if I go to the backside, right, you can get different tiling effects or repeating of some of these things. We can play around with patterns. But for now, the reason why I like this is because if at any point, you know, I'm just starting to add some of these things, but I might not be married to this piece. I might want to change it or want to make it work with some of the other pieces that I add. So what's so awesome about this is using Nanomesh in this way, we can go in and use the edit mesh functionality. So now I could go in and let's say, let me see where we're at. We got these pieces on the inside. So maybe you want to add a little extrusion to this or whatever. I can go in and I can use this one piece and repeat it all the way across. And maybe let's just go in, let's do X, let's do Y. So I'm going to just do a little modeling here. Let's do this guy in X as well. All right, and then maybe just do a little creasing to tidy up some of this stuff. Crease these hard edges here so I can smooth those out. Cool. All right, so just add in some details. Then I can go back to edit, and then I can apply that to everything. So if you think about it in this way, you can sort of shortcut a lot of things and don't have to spend a lot of time remodeling things or retouching things or tweaking things up. And I find that this is really a really fun way to kind of go through and just apply base nanomeshes to start with, and then go through and continue to build on top of them as you go. So in this case, you know, I got some of these pieces, they're not aligned perfectly, right? But I could easily just go in, take these now, and, you know, for example, we can go in inventory, do all of these one to mesh. All right, so we got everything. And now we could split parts, split hidden, and then let's go take a look. So we got this guy, and then I could easily just do quick mirror and weld. Let's do X and Z. There we go. So we got that stuff tidied up. All right, so really cool feature. I found this tons of fun to kind of play around with and add all kinds of, you know, nanos and indexes. So I think that's what I'm going to keep doing here and really try and polish up some of this. So this is where I go through and I start setting up the chain. So I've got all these parts and pieces in the back, but I really don't want to fumble with all these other stuff. Right, so I might just go in and set this to, say, the top of the chain. So I'll bring this guy to the top, set my start group, and then now I can go in. Let's take these, and these I actually want to do as arrays as well. Okay. All right, so we'll work with that. So I'm going to take this up to the top. Set that as my start. So if at any time I can set this one below, so that's sort of the end of the chain, so I could maybe turn everything off, and I can easily just go in and turn this on, so I just have these parts and pieces. All right, so let's start adding some stuff. So this piece, I think what I want to make sure, because I see that there's sort of this tiling back here, but I want to not marry myself to that idea. Go back and assign my repeat, set this maybe to 3. Get those guys going. And I'll actually mirror and weld that in X without local. There we go. All right, so I got that set up just in case. And then let's do a quick save. All right, so now with that sort of process outline, I'm going to go in now and just start to, you know, mess around with all these settings. And, you know, maybe I'll do a little bit of Nanomesh, maybe I'll do a little bit of array mesh. Like maybe for these guys, I don't know if I'm married to that actually. I might get rid of this. And let's go in here and let's play around with some array mesh. So I want to maybe get some like repeat parts going across here, maybe play around with the extruding options. So I could go in, so this, I need to start cleaning up my chains. We'll do engine details 1. So all the stuff that's details will be nanos or inserted stuff. So I'm going to build off of this, bring this guy back up. All right, so I want to go back, and I think I have it selected there, so I'm going to just insert this guy. So insert's going to bring it wherever, below wherever I have selected, which seems like a small thing, but a pen brings it all the way to the bottom. So I like to insert it at certain chains or parts in the subtool tree. So now let's go in and let's take a look. Let's bring this out. So again, I'm kind of just working on the left side. I think that's my default. I don't know, do you guys have like a, does anybody else have this thing where you have a default side that you work on? I'm always curious, like, if anybody else has that, because I cannot, I don't know, it's just I'm left brain oriented. I cannot go to that right side. I have to look at the left. It's very weird, but I accept it. All right, so maybe align this guy. And let's see, do I want that detail to be there or no? All right, well, let's try. So I'm going to rotate this guy. I'm actually going to clean up this cube for now. So I want to get rid of that little edge loop because I want to maybe bridge across. So I'm going to go turn on my local. Let's do refresh. Some positive Z is this way. So let's do mirror and weld in Z. There we go. Close that guy off. All right, so then scale this down, and then I'm going to group everything, and then let's only assign in Z-axis. Let's do a polygroup for the front, for these side corners here. All right, so we got that. All right, and I'll put this here. All right, so I want to use that Nanomesh ability, or that array mesh ability rather. And let's go in and do array. Actually, hold on, let's do one more. And let's mirror and weld in Y, no local. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys are catching when I'm using local, you know, I'm looking for just like mirror and welding across an axis, but if I want to do top to bottom, in this case with the floor grid, you see how everything is sort of unified, the floor grid sitting here, that's sort of my dividing line. So I kind of use the base underlying mesh. This one is my visual guide. I know that's mirror and welded in Y. So that's when I know when I need local and when I don't. But, you know, sometimes I forget to turn it off. You know, this is why I kind of bounce back and forth. But now what I'm trying to do is go into array mesh, it's lock position size, and let's go maybe like 10 repeats. So then using transpose again, turn out the gizmo. Let's maybe bring these guys. Maybe that's too much. So we'll go down to 8, 6, ooh, okay, 5. All right, so I can bring these guys over. All right, and then switch back to the gizmo, and I can maybe tuck these in if I want to. Okay, cool. All right, now I can leave it, you know, I might leave it for now, you know, just so I can go in and maybe do, let's do maybe symmetry in Y. Or no symmetry in this case because I've already mirror and welded. I just want to drop in a single edge loop in between each one, so give me something to work with here. There we go. And so I could maybe take Q mesh here, bring this out. All right, so now this is where I want to go in and assign those groups one more time. So I want these to extrude and say these ones. All right, and then mirror and weld in Z. Wow, every time. Oh, am I looking at the wrong one? Yes, I am. That's why. There we go. Remesh off. Cool. All right, so I got my green group, and now remesh back on. So with that extrude option, I could go and make mesh, bridge those gaps, and then I could play around with the. You know, I got a lot of creases going on, so I could maybe just do this really quick. Crease these edges where I need them. Yeah, so like I said, you know, it's a experimental workflow, but I've been finding that it's really fun to kind of just loosely go in and use these things to play around with different details and, you know, allow myself to just make stuff and not get forced into like spending an hour block modeling a piece like to match an image or, you know, free flowing until I get it and then maybe end up, you know, not liking it. I can kind of just quickly go in and create these kinds of pieces. So we got that in place. Now I want to go back to this piece and start using those insert meshes, get some more interesting shapes in here. All right, so I got, let's take a look here. Maybe I'll start to get the centered pieces working. Let's take this and make a new insert mesh. Make a Nanomesh brush from that. So maybe go in, switching back to Nanomesh. All right, let's check our rotations. That one's pretty good. And let's see, what else do we need? Okay, so now I might start playing around with the actual height values. Right, so I want to maybe stretch it. This is also another really great thing about it is I don't have to go back. Like obviously you could go back and you could edit the mesh, right? So I could bring this into view and grab the tops and scale them. But I can do the same thing here, which I think ultimately is a little bit easier. It's just the only issue is that you might skew or stretch the mesh based on what your edges are. Like in this case, I have these rounded out edges that I used to create this piece. So tons of options, but in this case I got to be careful because I don't want to lose the evenly spaced edges there. Let me play with the size here. All right. Let's go take a look. Yeah, I should probably check on the questions, huh? Zomax asking, am I right-handed? Or maybe that's somebody else. Sorry, engines is done already. I just hopped in. I'm glad to hear. Man, you guys have so many crazy usernames. Diagamonis. I'm glad you like the expose. That's actually something that I just discovered recently as a way to kind of view. I've always used it as a way to see, multi-mesh brushes and parts, but it actually has been working pretty well as a way to select parts and pieces. Because I don't know about you guys, but I get kind of hindered by menus, and insert mesh gets a little bit tricky because you have to split the part off if you want to use it by itself. So I find this way a little bit cleaner, I guess. But all right, so I got these guys going. Now let's take a look at the next one. I think I'm just gonna leave those for now. Come back to it. Now for anything else that I don't need, actually, you know what? Let's take a look at these guys. First index, I'm gonna edit this mesh. Solo this guy out. And I'm going to start doing a little bit of modeling on this guy. So let's do interactive here. Yeah, I'm just trying to come up with as much stuff as I can to kind of break up just the flatness of everything. Right, so then let's turn off edit. And then now we just need to, so right now it's kind of embedded in the surface, so you can't see those changes. So I can just go to my Z offset. So this is where I can go through, say 0.2, and that looks like it's okay. All right, so just kind of blocking up, and I'm kind of just going to build on top of these things just to create the illusion of functionality of all this stuff, right? Because that's the tricky part, especially with Mac, is you got to make it functional, but then also you want to make it look cool, and those two things kind of are very hard to do. Ergo Transformers, but blends. You asked for the deformers. Actually, yes, I do a ton. One thing I would suggest I was trying to stay away from deformers because I think Paul was covering that this week. And FYI for all you guys, I am in the process of actually finalizing all the deformer tutorials. So I've been taking the workload for those for Z Classroom. Paul's doing some, Joseph's doing some, but very, very soon we're going to have deformers tutorials for everything. So my goal is to have basic intro functionality, just very simple stuff, and then go in and do some more, you know, creative uses with each one. But a great use of deformers, especially in this case, let me quick save really quick, when you have all these custom parts and pieces, to kind of use it as a way to speed up your modeling workflow. Like I could take, say this piece for example, I could Shift X to close the expose. This one, right, like you've got some details already created. So a really cool thing is like take something that has details and you can go in and maybe apply extender, right? So I could, oops, let me turn off symmetry and then go to my extender, right? And I could use this as a way to maybe, you know, start to change this up. So I could use it to maybe, you know, add an edge loop here, add another edge loop there, and then I would maybe accept and then do it again. So now that I have those edge loops, I can maybe go in from here and change my dot and maybe use this as a way to scale, right, and create new shapes, right, and do it again here. Take this over, maybe scale these guys up, and I could go and accept, right, and then very quickly mirror and weld, right, and you got a new shape or new pieces that, you know, I find all kinds of happy accidents, particularly with the extender. In this case, when you're dealing with edges and beveling and that kind of stuff, you have to take your time with it. You know, you can't just, you know, scale and drag everywhere, otherwise you're going to get messiness. But, you know, it's a very cool tool and very fun to use, and, you know, you can't discredit the, you know, this inflate option too, which if I bring this guy in just a little bit, right, I can start to apply like little details like that very quickly. So to your question in short, yes. So I'll undo that. I might save this guy, or actually, you know what, you know, let's save it. We'll see what we can do with that. So something that I like to do too, if you guys don't, I turn off the undo history counter or the selector so I can't see it. But, you know, if you want to keep new modification, save the old, just duplicate. The new one gets rid of any undo history, so you don't have anything new. But the old one still has everything. So I could just go back, undo to the point where I was originally. There we go. And then I often just go in and delete undo history. So then now you got a new piece and the original. We'll say, yeah, I guess 2-2 works. Okay, so we got, where are we at? Where did I leave off? So I got this piece going. All right, all I want to do is get a couple more things in here, and I got some really cool stuff I want to show you still. Let's go back and get my expose out. All right, so this piece, let's get trying to finalize the corners. You know, I'm gonna modify this UI really quick because I keep going into the brush menu, and that's getting annoying. So let me bring my brush palette over here. Or I guess we could just do it from here. Create insert mesh, and let's do create Nanomesh. Boom. You know, we could easily make a macro and auto assign these things, which might be something I'll do to this, but this is a new UI. I'm kind of working on trying to strip down a few things and just getting my essentials, but I have I don't know what version I'm on now. Version 2.0. Let's go, well, I'm just going to overwrite that. We'll say this is still 2.0. All right. So then I think I have this guy. So I can go insert mesh, new, Nanomesh. I might just collapse the brush and restore those as well. All right, here we go. Alright, so I've been doing some of these parts with symmetry on. I think in this case I'm going to go in just to play around with the settings first and then just copy and paste. So let's get Nanomesh going in here. Okay, no rotation. Let's go offset. Another thing we can do is we can go to edit placement. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. I could do edit placement, use the gizmo, lock it to that piece, and I could also move this. So it's kind of just giving you a poly to display that. The only thing is you don't see it as far as referencing, so you know, I could use that or maybe just go in and do manual values. Okay, so I like that piece. I'm going to copy that, and let's go paste it. And make sure this one's aligned to normal as well. Cool. Okay, so I got these guys. So I'm trying to create some sort of like bridging for these flaps, and then I can go in, go back to my, see, that's this piece. Okay. Get my reference up here. And last but not least, let's get some of these panels going. So I got some just basic panels that I've modeled out. There we go. Yeah, and also, I don't know if you guys, if you're going for specific placement, you know, dragging the slider is okay, and you can click above it, you know, to type in the value, but you can also hit up on the keyboard, and you actually use backspace eventually. So when you got the text highlighted in red, I can go in and actually get this going a little bit more accurately. And then let's copy this, and let's paste this here. And then this one I'm going to align here, and maybe flip. There we go. And I might just play around with that alignment. Cool. All right, so I could go through the process if I had a bunch of repeat parts to model on. In this case, I'm just doing a few pieces here and there, which is fine because I can go in and mirror and weld with a symmetrical piece. If you didn't have a symmetrical piece, I would say take these repeat parts and actually go in and, you know, assign them per poly, because the benefit, if you're going to take advantage of this where you want to go in and, you know, start to tweak and model stuff, like I could go in and say grab, start doing some modeling again with no symmetry. So I'm going to leave that. Because then I could maybe go and start doing some inset regions, maybe making a frame for some buttons or something that might go into this. QMesh these guys. And then actually start doing some beveling. Right? Or, at the very least, if you don't want to deal with the inflation or all of that, we could go in and do another inset. Make sure it's a region. And then use that QMesh with polyloop. Alright, so I got a nice polyloop going around in this space, and I can maybe just go in and use that stepping to create that even bridge there. And then go in and do a little crease. check it. Or do my Control-Shift-L to assign group by normals, which actually usually does the trick a little bit quicker. It makes it easier to assign that group by normals and increase polygroups and reduce the amount of manual edge loops I got to go in and tweak, and then I can go in and do that. All right, so I got that. And if you did have multiple pieces, it might be beneficial to apply it more instead of doing what I'm going to do, which is go in here now. Let's start to generate these. So I'm going to quick save again. Where are we at for, at 5:45 already? Oh my goodness, time flies. Okay, so we're coming up to the close. So the last thing I wanted to do before I'm going to go ahead and do one to mesh really quick. All right, because eventually, if I can kind of give you guys an outline for, I'll show you the final setup. I'm going to save this as thing because I found this technique really beneficial for all kinds of stuff. One in particular that was actually something I just kind of thought of while thinking about this stream is, what else can I make use of Nanomesh for? If you take a look at, like let's go up to the close-up of this thing, for example. You got, turn the contrast down. All these paneling and sort of textured details where you get this sort of imperfect structure. It's kind of weathered and beat up a little bit. One thing that I found really awesome with this is, let's go in now really quick and I'll take this. So I'm going to go subtool, solo this guy out. And I'm going to get rid of all these pieces. So I'm just selecting it, growing everything out, and I can do split hidden. Right, so these are going to be, bring this up. Say 2. All right, so I got this stuff. I'm going to go to my polygroups really quick, do an auto group. Let's make sure everything's mirrored properly. Cool, mirrored in X. And we can even do, say, mirror and weld in X and Z. Not local in this case. Oh, where am I at in space here? Let's go for it. Ah, that's why. Okay, well, easy fix. We could go in and do Control, duplicate those guys. Do it the old-fashioned way, huh? Just to kind of get this going. All right, so we got that stuff lined up. Now, I want to go in and I want to start to create some more sort of panels and details. And in this case, I don't want to, let's take a look at maybe, so which part would work for this. Let's take a look at the back. So we got all this untouched area, all these areas that don't have anything. I'm going to solo this out. I'm going to group this. Let's go. I'm going to make a proxy of this guy, and let's go engine temp for nano panels. All right. Okay, so essentially what I want to do is go in and start to apply all kinds of randomized panels and using Nanomesh to do that. So I've been assigning Nanomesh to specific polys, but let's go in here and let's actually assign a good group here. Actually, shortcut this. Group by normals. All right, and I can isolate this. Let's get rid of this guy. Group that together. All right, so I've got a chunk here, right? And I want to start to apply some texture. So I think in my brush, I've got just this very simple 6-sided, formerly a cube. Now it's just sort of flattened a little bit. So let's go and do the insert mesh and do a nanomesh. All right, so now I could go in here and let's take, I'm going to solo this guy out. I also want to do groups for these. All right, so we got some details on here, right? But there's a lot of space that's not really touched in this case. All right, so I can maybe go in, let me focus on the, I just can't decide. Okay, so let's do it on this. We're going to go insert Nanomesh. We can do polygroup all. All right, so I'm just assigning it to this polygroup. All right, so I'm just kind of dragging these, rotating a little bit. Now we've been kind of doing calculated nanos, but this is also one of the best features. I think one of the more interesting features about Nanomesh is we've applied some nanos to it, and now I can start doing random distribution. And the great thing about this is, you know, we can start to scale, and as soon as we start adding variations to each, you know, length, width, and height, you'll notice as soon as I start to do this Z offset, we'll do variation for Z just a little bit. All right, so we're starting to get this overlap. Now, the more I play around with my width and my height with these variations, you're getting randomization. So maybe not too much height, but I can kind of go in here, do it like this. We could change the rotation. So this is kind of at an angle. So I can maybe take this down to 0. All right, so that's giving me some panels and some details. Now, you know, the goal is to just use it as a way to kind of start adding some of these textures and things to these panels to give me something to work with that normally what I'd have to do with a texture or whatever, but I can actually do this on the fly with Geo. And you can play around with, there's ways using the clip to sort of clip the borders of where it's sitting, but you'll notice that it gets a little tricky with this many meshes and the angles of these polygroups. So I don't even mess around with that. I kind of like to get into just, you know, doing it the easiest way that I can think of, which for me is using the new Booleans. So I could take this piece here, I could copy this, and let's go in and let's do insert Nanomesh for these polygroups. Maybe paste those settings, and then maybe do it for these guys. All right, so I got some texture details on all parts, at least these parts here. Now I'm just gonna quick save really quick. One to mesh, one to mesh, one to mesh. All right, so this underlying mesh, that's why I duplicated the engine here, so I got just a backup. So now I just want to take this guy, and we're going to split hidden. So these are the nano panels. All right, so in order to clean up those edges, now that we have Booleans, it's so easy to go in and just, you know, it's like, at this point, it's like kindergarten. It's like, how do I take this thing and cut it out from this? So, you know, my method for this, in this case, was to, you know, obviously we could go in and take like a cube or something and just like match it to these angles and cut it out, but I can use the underlying mesh to cut out exactly where those borders are. So I'm going to solo this, and in this case, let's group everything. Let's go. Make sure display properties is double. There we go. Let's go here and here. So I'm going to grow out to those edges. I'm going to take this. I'm going to go mirror, delete hidden. All right. So then now I'm just going to go in because I'm going to do a little extruding. Right. And in this case, I like to remove any possibility of overlapping edges or whatever, just to keep this clean. So I'm going to clean up some of these edge loops here. I think this should work out fine actually, as long as it's not on. And let's remove creases. Crease, uncrease all. Yeah, like this for example, I know for sure that that's going to overlap. So what I would do is where the parts that I need to cut out, I could just go in and maybe. You know what, we could do it. We could try it. Let's do this. I'm going to go in and assign polygroups just to these guys. All right, so I got those. So I'm just doing all the left and then the top facing ones separately, which I think should help me to kind of tidy this up at the end. All right, now I'm going to go in and just do QMesh. Let's do all polygons, so just a little bit, so I don't get too much overlap. And then now do my single edge loop. Come on, now you can see one. Sorry, they're very close together. There we go. Okay, so I'm just doing that so I could do that trick where, oh no, my polygroups got lost. Okay, well, let's try it. these guys. All right, so now that gives me the option to do this, and I can go to my poly groups. Let's do auto group so I can get this guy together. This one, this one. So I'm just masking this off because all I want to do, because I'm going to use a Boolean, and I think it'll make sense once I'm towards the end here. But all I need to do is make sure that I have thickness, and then it doesn't overlap with the meshes. So I'm just trying to go through and assign proper groups. Let's go perspective so I can see that. And then let's do arrow and X and Y. There we go. No perspective. Alright, so essentially all I'm doing is going through and making an extrusion, and then I can go to X and Y, and now I can solve this. Right, I'm trying to make a cut line for all this. So I'm just going to go in here and let's take, I just got to overlap this stuff, so I can take this here, and I can stretch this just to cut out those parts. And this is why, you see that the overlap, so I'm just using this as a piece. This is sort of my Play-Doh, my cutout piece. And then I can just make it quick and dirty and see if this works. Mask those guys off. Okay, there you go. Here, well done, X and Y. Cool. Okay, so got this set up. So this is going to be the nano panels are the pieces that I want to subtract from. So I'm going to move this up, set that in the chain, and then set this to subtract. And then in this custom UI, I've got my Booleans here, right? And I just got, majority of this stuff is cut. I got a little excess, which I could go in and play around with just to get it working, to cut out that piece, but I think I'll be able to delete hidden afterwards. So live Boolean on. I don't need dynamic or anything, so I'm just going to make the mesh. So now I have this piece, so I can maybe go in and tidy up that and that. Delete hidden. So now we can go back and, let's say, get rid of this. We don't even need that. We don't need the temp engine. So I can insert my new UMesh nanos. And let's turn these guys off. All right, so now I've got this perfectly cut out piece that's sitting right on the mesh. And then now I could go in and just kind of play around with the positioning of this maybe. All right, so this is just a base underlying detail that I can use to apply to get all kinds of paneling and details. So I'm probably going to go in and do this a lot, like for all kinds of parts, right? Like even back here, it's just it's something to have instead of nothing, right? Because you just have a flat surface, and you got to go in and repeat all that. And I figure at some point I'll be able to go through and assign different color values, you know, to get that sort of breaking and bridging between, so you can see the edges and things like that. So I find that to be a really cool technique, and you know, imagine just doing it with something that's not just a cube or a flat cube, you know, doing it with something that has more texture and detail. So, you know, I'll quick save and I'll load where I'm at now. So I think, because we're getting close to the end here, my plan is probably just to go through and use this technique and other techniques that I wanted to show you guys. Let's go. Oh no, oh, this is the wrong one. I am on 31 Boolean. There we go. All right, so kind of doing the same technique. One thing I wanted to get to today was using Nano to kind of create sort of tiles. All right, so I used a combination of Nanomesh and Array Mesh to create these bridging to get a fully, you know, sort of textured plate here as sort of the base underlying detail. And I can use this technique across the board on all these parts and pieces. So essentially, let me load it in really quick. Custom modeled parts. Shift X. I believe it was one of these. I started off with some different tiles, but I think I ended up with this. All right, so if I solo this guy out, basically assigning polygroups to taking a base piece and going through and applying that. So I should check the comments because I know we're getting close to the end here. Yeah, it's 6 o'clock. Oh gosh, there's a lot. I'm sorry. Let's see. How did you do incremental beveling? Diesel. Incremental beveling. Remind me of that part? I forget where I was. Yeah, Zomax, definitely try using Nano. It's a blast. You know, that's the thing is, I still, you know, I know how the features were created and modeled, and we all here at Pixologic help to do those things, but I think oftentimes they're so creative and there's new techniques and ways to use this stuff that I'm still discovering things, which is really fun, actually. I love it. And I found it to be, you know, it keeps me going. It gives me new things to learn all the time, which I feel like we need. But CD sold QMesh mode and ZModeler. I still can't. I'm trying to figure out incremental beveling. I'm sorry, Diesel. I'm not sure what you meant by that. Yeah, well, going on that, Diesel. Thanks, man, for the compliments. I'm glad you're picking up some stuff. And yeah, I think if you guys are cool with it, I might take this piece from start to finish because, you know, using all kinds of stuff, like I haven't even gotten into one thing that I wanted to kind of work with you guys and show you is like all these little fine details. I've got techniques to, you know, use a lot of these things to get all these panelings with live Booleans. It was one thing that I found incredibly useful with, I can show you guys really quick my, let's see, presentation. I want to say breakdown, final slides. Yeah, so let me give you guys just like a brief outlook on this. So I put together a quick PDF, which if you guys haven't checked out the Far 8 release beta forum, this is posted. I posted this a year ago when we were working in development, but I found this technique to go in and apply these arrays and nanos to get all kinds of details and repeat these parts. I mean, I can't stress enough like how much you can take one part that you had detailed with array mesh on it, duplicate that, and then stretch that across. So, you know, my goal is to kind of build on top of that for stuff like this, you know, taking one piece, repeating it across, adding little details to subtract or add with live Boolean, and go through and just apply that in all different areas. Because, you know, you can see if this is going to be the final piece, I have to find out who the artist is. Shout out, this is a great concept piece. There's all kinds of details that we can come up with in here. So hopefully you guys will find that useful. You know, I'm open to suggestions, but the plan is to do this every month. So yeah, Ola Sean, you can make that and an alpha too, and definitely use this VDMs. In this particular workflow, VDMs wouldn't work because you're still dealing with resolution. I'm working with low poly stuff, but eventually, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities. I mean, once I get all the base parts in here, then we can go into a whole nother stage of adding subdivisions, maybe using alphas with displacements and surface noise. You know, there's all kinds of possibilities. I mean, if you go to a good example of kind of what I'm referencing is never forget Z Classroom, because let me see, I want to say it was like Cityscape. I'm gonna have to go the old-fashioned route. There's a tutorial in here by the one, the only Joseph Drest, and he has a really cool, okay, ZBrush for concepting. Definitely check this out. There's some really interesting effects that can be created with just using surface noise, just to kind of outline taking a texture and going in and applying an alpha, basically black and white values. We can go in and we can clip out certain parts and get details and create geo from that. So if you guys have seen this tutorial, you probably know what I'm talking about. But my goal is to maybe even get to that point and go and use that on top of all these things. So kind of just building up in layers into, base details, next, and then this would be a method to, get those last fine-tuned details that are just so randomized it'd be impossible to do without texturing or doing it manually. So, yeah, I guess my time is up, 4 to 6. Yeah, boom, see classroom, Kyle. Boo. So that's it, guys. Hopefully you enjoyed, and thanks for sticking around up until 6. It's the end of the workday for us, so I think I'm going to head home and relax. Maybe go play some Wildlands. Oh, speaking of that, just to let you guys know, we have a ZBrush Let's Play happening next week. Monday, Kyle, Michael, Kingsley, what time? I forget. I think it's early, 9 a.m., 10 a.m. It's on ZBrushLive.com, so you can find it there. But we're going to be sitting with some of the artists from Ubisoft, talking about Wildlands and also playing the game. So if you guys haven't checked out the last Let's Plays that we've done, we did one for, oh gosh, I'm blanking, with Fallout, with Bethesda and id Software, so Fallout and Doom, and we played around with Final Fantasy, and this one should be really fun. I myself have been playing Wildlands a lot, actually. I really like the game, so definitely check that out. Yeah, there you go. Kingsley dropped it, 9 a.m. Pacific time. So that should be it for me, guys. Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate it. I'm just glad to help and, offer as many tips and tricks as I can. If I come up with them, I'll try and share them in the stream. So thanks for sticking around, and I'll catch you guys next month. Have a good weekend.